Something about our past just doesn't feel finished. It doesn't sit still. It doesn't shut up. It hangs in the back of the mind like a notification you can't clear, a quiet voice whispering in the dark. This story might be bigger than what we were told. And if that is true, then everything changes. Who we are changes. Our place in the universe changes. So let's stop pretending we're not curious and finally look straight at the question everyone keeps trying to bury. Did humanity really do this alone? Or did something else walk beside us? Stay with me, because once you see what we're about to look at, it gets very hard to forget. Something in history refuses to stay silent, and tonight we are going to listen to it. Not with fear, not with denial, with open eyes, steady breath, and curiosity that doesn't back down. Before we dive into claims, legends, and arguments, we need to slow down. We need to ask a simple question that somehow feels impossible to answer honestly. What do we really know about our own beginning? We grow up with clean timelines, straight lines in textbooks, neat labels, comfortable explanations that say, relax, it all makes perfect sense. But when you strip away the confidence, when you ignore the tone, and just look at the pieces of history themselves, some of them don't feel clean. They don't feel simple. They feel older than they should be, more advanced than they should be, or simply out of place. And that's where curiosity wakes up, not because we want fantasy, but because something inside us knows when a story doesn't sit right. So here's the promise. We're not here to blindly believe, and we're not here to blindly deny. We're here to stand in the uncomfortable middle and actually look. So let's talk about what actually bothers people. Across the world, we find ruins that whisper the same uneasy question. How did this civilization do that back then? Monuments aligned with stars with shocking precision. Structures built with engineering skill that shouldn't exist at their point in history. Stories carved in stone, describing beings from the heavens, not as metaphor, but as memory. Is all of that coincidence? Is it symbolism? Shared human imagination repeating the same dream? Science says those things can be explained by culture, patience, and time. Believers say those explanations feel trimmed, edited, too comfortable. Because sometimes a detail doesn't feel like imagination. Sometimes it feels like someone was trying very hard to describe something real, using the only language they had. And that's where the argument truly begins. Not with fantasy, not with denial, but with the uncomfortable question nobody wants to answer honestly. What if some of this doesn't fit because the story isn't complete? This is where the world splits in two. On one side, you have science, calm, controlled, confident. It says humans are brilliant, patient, stubborn, and capable of far more than we give our ancestors credit for. Everything you see, it argues, was built through time, learning, failure, improvement, and genius. Nothing more mystical than that. On the other side, you have those who say that explanation feels trimmed, like a story edited to remove the chapters that make people uncomfortable. They say too many cultures remember something greater. Too many myths sound strangely like eyewitness reports rather than symbolic poetry. So which is it? Is science protecting truth or protecting comfort? Is belief chasing fantasy or refusing to ignore the pieces that don't fit neatly on a classroom timeline? Most people choose a side, but here, we don't have to. We can stand in the middle. We can let the tension exist, and we can keep asking the questions science hates hearing, and believers can't stop repeating. What if both sides are only holding half of the story? And then, there are the places in history that don't just raise questions, they punch straight through certainty. Archaeologists uncover streets where life seems to have stopped mid-motion. People frozen, as if something hit so fast, no one even had time to realize what was happening. Nearby stone shows signs of sudden extreme heat exposure, far beyond normal disaster expectations for that period. Not slow destruction, not gradual collapse, instant, violent, unexplainable. There is no single explanation everyone agrees on, no tidy conclusion, just silence, and a question that refuses to die. Even some scientists quietly admit, that part is strange. This isn't fantasy. This isn't myth. This is the uncomfortable gray zone that doesn't care about anyone's opinion. It forces one thought into your mind, and once it's there, it never leaves. History shrugs. Textbooks move on, but the question sits like a crack in glass, widening the longer you stare at it. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Not ever. It stays with you. What happened here? So why does this matter? Why do questions like this refuse to leave the human mind? Because this isn't just about ruins or stones or theories. It's about us. Humans don't want a small story. We don't want to believe our existence is just an accident that happened once and could vanish without meaning. We want connection, purpose, something bigger than survival and routine. Believers say that hunger exists because once, something answered it. Something powerful enough to burn itself into memory. Science says that hunger exists because humans need meaning to stay sane. Myth comforts. Myth protects. Myth explains the fear of being alone in a silent universe. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Both sides sound human. Both sides make emotional sense. And that doesn't calm anything. It makes the question louder. Because when belief and logic both feel right, the mind doesn't relax. It leans closer. And the story stops feeling like a debate and starts feeling personal. So let's step back for a moment and look at the bigger picture. What if this isn't really a fight between science and belief at all? What if this is a story about identity? Because buried inside this entire discussion is a terrifying, beautiful question. Who are we, really? Are we an accident that somehow climbed its way out of mud and darkness? Or are we part of something older, bigger, written into a story that started long before we appeared? Believers say we were guided, watched, maybe even taught. Science says we fought, learned, evolved, failed, survived, and became extraordinary on our own. Both versions say something powerful about humanity. One says we were chosen. The other says we earned everything we are. And somewhere between those two ideas, the world suddenly feels larger, heavier, more meaningful. Because either way, our story is not small. So let's step back for a moment and look at the bigger picture. What if this isn't really a fight between science and belief at all? What if this is a story about identity? Because buried inside this entire discussion is a terrifying, beautiful question. Who are we, really? Are we an accident that somehow climbed its way out of mud and darkness? Or are we part of something older, bigger, written into a story that started long before we appeared? Believers say we were guided, watched, maybe even taught. Science says we fought, learned, evolved, failed, survived, and became extraordinary on our own. Both versions say something powerful about humanity. One says we were chosen. The other says we earned everything we are. And somewhere between those two ideas, the world suddenly feels larger, heavier, more meaningful. Because either way, our story is not small. So what do we do with all of this? We stand at a crossroads between comfort and curiosity, between a tidy story that lets us sleep easily and a bigger story that refuses to stay quiet. And that's the part nobody likes to admit. It's easier to laugh it off, easier to pretend the strange moments in history don't matter, easier to say, "There's nothing to see here," and move on with life. But something in us doesn't move on. Something in us keeps looking back, like there is a shadow on the timeline, and ignoring it feels dishonest. So maybe the most dangerous choice isn't believing. Maybe the most dangerous choice is refusing to look. Because whatever the truth is, it shaped us. It built the world we stand in. And pretending that the question doesn't exist doesn't make it go away. It just means we choose not to hear it. So maybe the truth isn't simple. Maybe it isn't clean. Maybe it isn't comfortable. But it matters. Because whatever happened in our past shaped our minds, our civilizations, our sense of who we are. If we were guided, then the universe noticed us. If we weren't, then humans are far more extraordinary than we ever understood. Either way, our story is bigger than a neat sentence in a school book. So stay curious. Stay brave enough to think, brave enough to feel wonder, brave enough to admit when something simply doesn't add up. Because one thing feels real. The past is not silent. It's still speaking. And maybe, just maybe, we are finally ready to listen.